Dankeschön.
I can't see anybody. That's quite scary.
It's like one of those television programs in the 70s. I don't have a woolly pullover on.
Right. Okay. So thank you very much for coming. I met Mark about half a year ago for the first time in person, and I thought he's the man that we need for this event today. So thank you very much, Mark, for coming here and talking to us about lots of things. I know there are some Berlinophiles in this room, so we will talk about Berlin, of course. Before that, I would like to talk about Manchester a little bit, so where you've come from and how you made your way over to Berlin. And then, of course, I'd like to talk about this big thing happening in Berlin and how you managed to be in the West and in the East and have insight into both music scenes and I would say actually helping young people in Berlin to express themselves, especially in the East. So thank you very much again. And well, let's start. So you are Mancunian, Mark.
Yes, I'm from Denton. The arse end of Manchester.
Right. And before you decided to go to Berlin, what were your ambitions in life?
What were my ambitions in life? Well, initially I wanted to be a graphic designer, but once I entered into that realm of graphic design, I realised that people really are horrible, and I didn't want to work there. Yeah, they were all horrible people, and I have been working as a part-time kind of helper, if you like, at Virgin Record shop in Lever Street in Manchester, from being about 14, and I went and I said, I can't stand this job. And they went, why don't you work here? And so I just went back to the office. It was near the cathedral. And I went and I just went, near the town hall it was. The advertising agency. I just went, fuck off, I'm leaving. Barry was the name of this American guy who had this agency. And I went, no, I'm leaving. You can't leave. You've got letter setting to do. That's all, you know, you study to be a graphic designer and all you get to do is like letter setting. It was always like, you know, 5 minutes before 5 o'clock, you know, shops are about to shut and you've run out of E's. And has anybody got any E's? Like, no, of course not. Got a different meaning later on, that.
Right, okay. And why did you decide to then actually leave the city?
I didn't decide. I went away. Yeah, I'd heard that Virgin Records were going to transform themselves into what became known as the mega store. And when I asked, oh, what's that? They said, it's like a supermarket for records. And I thought, fucking hell, I don't want to work in a supermarket. There's visions of putting like Eagles, you know, Hotel California and meet Fleetwood Mac in these kind of like carriages, you know, shopping carts. I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to stock shelves, you know. And so I thought I'll just go and take a little break and I'll go travel around and buy some records. Go to Europe and buy some records. Yeah. And on my travels, I ended up in Berlin. It wasn't planned. I'd always wanted to go. It was so far away. It was in the middle of East Germany, in the middle of nowhere. And everybody in West Germany, when you talk to them, said, oh, I'm thinking about going to Berlin. They'd always go, no, what do you want to go there for? It's not. They didn't see Berlin as being this kind of like jewel in their crown. They saw it as this kind of thorn in the side. You know, it was like this outpost somewhere of like misery somewhere in the middle of East Germany. It wasn't attractive. All the dregs of society seemed to get washed up in Berlin. Right, this is what they thought, you know, because like Germany being this kind of, you know, very hardworking and everything, you know, like it's very correct. Suddenly, you know, this image of like all these like dregs, these people who didn't want to go to the German army would all flee there. You know, anyone who was like gay, transvestite, weird in any way, you know, they all went to Berlin, and so they weren't really encouraging when I said, oh, I'm thinking about going to Berlin. They were like, what do you want to go there for? So when I ended up there, I realised everybody who was there was like me. It was great.
Right. Okay. Somebody a couple of days ago called you Mr. Factory Europe, and I would like to ask you about the factory connection before we move on to Berlin. So,
right. Well,
you were the ambassador.
Well, I suppose you could call it that. I knew Rob Gretton and I knew Tony Wilson, And also I knew Peter Saville on the periphery when he was like being an art student. He'd always come and ask me, what records are good this week, you know, have you got anything on the side? As I did Tony Wilson, you know. And in fact, everybody that I knew out of that scene, they'd always ask me for like, can you put something to one side for me that no one else can have, you know? So, and I suppose, you know, I was quite influential as to what records they got as well. So, you know, being part of that little kind of group of people who was running the only punk record shop in Manchester was the only place where people could really get the stuff. When I went to Germany, Rob Gretton said, well, now you're there, you can promote Joy Division's records. Right? And I think, yeah, great, you know, great, best band in Manchester, you know, promote that. Everyone will love this in Berlin, you know. No reaction whatsoever. So I send all these records off, you know, nothing, not even a thank you card, you know, nothing. Yeah? And I was trying to convince people, oh, they're the best band in Manchester. No, a miserable band from Manchester. No one was interested at all, you know. And I've managed to kind of like convince Connie Konchak, who ran this club, that it was at nights. He put concert nights on at the Kant Kino in Kantstrasse in Berlin, and he'd had, you know, a few punk bands on there. And I thought, oh, he's probably open to this. And I was like, Joy Division. He's like, oh, I've heard about them, didn't I? And it's not really my kind of thing. Eventually, he ended up doing it. He put the concert on, and I was, oh, it's going to be great, you know. Not 30 people turn up, 50 people maybe. I don't know. Didn't count them, you know. And I was quite depressed at this, you know, this non-event. But as Joy Division themselves had constantly had to play in front of 20 people, for them they thought it was really good, and they loved the fact that they could finger the bullet holes. So I became the, yeah. It was, all Ian wanted to do was go and see the Brandenburg Gate from the other side of the Berlin Wall. So we went to East Berlin, you know, and then we just went around looking at all the places where the war had happened, and you could see all the remnants and references to it, you know, and they loved that, you know, and eating Schweinshaxe, yeah, that was another thing, that half a baby's leg, yeah.
Nicely put.
Looks like that. It's a piece of pork, but you know. But anyway, so I became then the Factory Records representative, if you like. Yeah, Tony Wilson wanted me to do Factory Records Germany, in fact, you know, but he wasn't prepared to pay for it. You know, it's like, you've paid for it first, and if you make any money, then we'll get the accolade.
Right. So you went to West Berlin first.
Yes.
So do you want to tell us how you found kind of getting into West Berlin and settling there?
Oh, well, you know, just travelling from a hitchhike to Berlin, yeah, in the night, and it was like going through a time tunnel almost. You know, just left wet, shiny, gleaming, glittering West Germany into this darkness, and it was just like this long road of just darkness with just the headlights and the sound of the car going over this what was once Hitler's autobahn, going the car wheels, you know, and then and this student guy to pick me up, he just had the radio on, and he kept just trying to find some station, and it'd be going and at one end, which was the signal from the Allied forces that everything was okay, and on the other end it would be all the East Germans going 1, 2, 15, 20, 30, 20, 20. And I was like, what the fuck is that? He said, yeah, it's some coded messages. Okay, and where am I going, you know? And you get through this like, and you could see this gleaming, glittering thing on the horizon after about 3 hours, because you're only allowed to travel at 100 kilometers an hour on the autobahn, because that was the top speed of a Trabant, and they didn't want any of these Western BMWs or something overtaking a Trabant, right? So you're only allowed to do 100 kilometers an hour. So it took 3 hours to drive from West Germany to West Berlin. 3 hours. Today it's like half an hour. You know, then it took ages, and we get there. And I thought, oh, it's nothing like I expected Berlin to be, because we drove onto the Kurfürstendamm, which is this kind of like gleaming, glittering, shiny street, you know, full of like fashionable shops. And I thought, oh, it's really not like I expected. And we ended up in Schöneberg, and that was much more what I'd imagined it to be, like in a kind of like, you know, John le Carré novel, bullet-riddled, bombed-out buildings, you know. And we came to this palatial place, this like flat they had, these students, and they said, yeah, this house is about to be torn down, but you can stay here until we get thrown out. And so they gave me this skeleton key and said, here, there's a flat upstairs, it's free, you can go there. So I went in there, it was a beautiful 6-room apartment with, you know, parquet floorboards and frilly bits on the ceiling, and a white marble bathroom, and I was like, what is this? I came from a council house in Manchester, you know, where the ceiling's here. I'm in this palace, you know, and I couldn't believe it. Why did they want to tear this place down? And I stayed there for about 8 months.
Is that the place where Nick Cave comes into this? Okay.
No, that was a completely another. Once we had to move out of that flat, I moved into a very small 22 square metre hovel in the back end of Kreuzberg with an outside toilet, and no heating, apart from an oven, coal heating, and no hot water. And when Nick was... I went on tour with another band. I was their sound engineer, and I went on tour with this band called Die Haut. And the drummer was Thomas Wiedler. He was the drummer of my band, the Unbekannten. And I was just doing their sound, and we just went on tour with him with the birthday party. And Nick Cave kept asking me, like, what's it like living in Berlin? You know, how easy is it to live in Berlin? You know, is it easy to get a flat? Is it easy to do this? And the attraction, I thought, was the fact that you could get cheap drink and cheap drugs in Berlin, right? And it was like, you know, because what was known as the Intershop, which was this duty-free shop in the middle of East Berlin where you could buy all this booze for like nothing, you know, and fags and everything. And I was like, oh, you know, I thought this was the attraction of Berlin, but it wasn't actually. The real attraction was Thomas Wiedler's girlfriend, who happened to be the manager of the record label that I released records on, Elizabeth. And he'd seen her and was immediately besotted. And the only reason I wanted to come to Berlin was because of her. And so I said to him, well, the best thing to do, if you want to find a flat, just come stay with me for a few weeks and then you'll find a flat, you know. So 2 weeks later, ding dong, he's standing there with 2 suitcases. He's like, oh, okay. Right, okay. You know, and he kept going looking for a flat for days on end, you know, like, long looking for a flat. And then he, one afternoon the doorbell rang and there's this girl standing there with red hair. She goes, hello, is Nick there? Who are you? I'm Anita, his girlfriend. oh dear. And then for like 2 days Nick didn't come home, and I was thinking, what am I going to do here, you know, like, how do I get out of this, you know? And then he came, and there's a big, of course, theatricals and stuff, and they managed to sort themselves out later, but it was like amateur dramatic society.
Your life in West Berlin is quite well documented through the film that you made, B-Movie. I don't know if everybody can see this on here on the screen.
These are my slides.
Actually, yes, they are the photographs you
sent. They're photos, yeah, that I took. Yeah.
So you got quite settled in that West Berlin music scene. But what was it then that made you actually go over to East Berlin?
Oh, I immediately wanted to go to East Berlin. The first day that I got there, you know, I was thinking, like, while I'm here, I might as well just nip over the wall, you know. But no one would tell me how to do it. It was like, you speak to Germans and they go, oh, no, I don't know, you know. They wouldn't say, oh, you have to go to Checkpoint Charlie. They were just like, no, you don't go there, you know. They really weren't promoting East Berlin. And I eventually found out, oh, you could just go to Checkpoint Charlie. And I went to East Berlin, and it was like... It was, again, stepping back into another realm, into another time. It was like going to some kind of science fiction film set or something. It was like another planet entirely, you know. It was like stepping back into the 50s somehow. And I was fascinated by this. It was like I needed to find more and more information, because the information that I knew that had been told before going was all this kind of westernized version of what East Germany or Eastern Europe was about, you know. And I went over there and I found all these people over the years and realised it wasn't like that. How did you find them? Well, they found me, really. I mean, one guy I saw on the Underground, and at the end of '79 it must have been, and he had a bit spiky hair, kind of drain pipe trousers, and I collared him and said, like, you look a bit punky, you know, is anything happening like punk concerts or anything? And he just looked at me and he went, no, everything's forbidden here like this. I was like, okay. I thought, oh, poor kid, you know. Well, if you know of anything, here's my name and address. Yeah, write me a postcard, because I knew you couldn't phone me from the East. You couldn't make phone calls so easy. So I said, here's my name and address. Write me a postcard. If you hear of anything, it's going to happen. And I didn't hear anything from this kid ever again. About sort of 6 months later, I get a letter from this girl asking to meet me at the Palast der Republik, which is the East German Parliament building, in their cocktail bar upstairs, in this like round cocktail bar. I thought, okay, I'll go to that and find out what's happening. So I met this girl, and she just kind of like quizzed me about, you know, what you're doing, what you want to find, you know. And she was part of this East German punk scene, which was very small, yeah, handful of people, because it was forbidden to be a punk in East Germany. Right? You couldn't be a punk. It meant something anti-state. They didn't know how to control punks. They could control hippies. They could control metal kids and stuff. You know, but like punks, they couldn't control that. They didn't know how to deal with that. So it was immediately forbidden. And if you wanted to be a punk and look like a punk, you ran the risk always of being like stopped by the police and all this. But she was involved in this little scene, and so she introduced me to her friends, and that's how I got involved in this kind of group of people. And I realised like they all liked the music that I liked, but they couldn't buy the music that I liked. So I would just smuggle it on cassettes into East Berlin and just bring it to them. And then, you know, I didn't kind of advertise the fact I'm smuggling cassettes this week. You know, it was very secret. It was a very one-on-one thing, and only one of my circle of friends actually was the recipient of the cassettes. He was the only person who knew that I was doing this. And suddenly he had a cassette of the latest Sisters of Mercy LP, you know, and it's like, and these cassettes would get copied and copied and copied and copied and copied and copied forever, you know.
Until you don't actually hear the music anymore. I remember doing this at home, East German, and you would copy the cassette so many times that it's just white noise in the end, and you have a little bit of a bass coming through, and that's about it. And you really have to listen hard to kind of get into the flow. Yes,
probably my cassettes that she was copying.
Probably. Okay, so we have arrived at kind of 79, and you're going over to East Berlin, and you're kind of meeting punks. What I want to talk about next is way before the wall comes down, because I actually do think Mark doesn't get enough credit for what he manages to put on in East Berlin. There's a still famous, in Germany famous, a punk band called Die Toten Hosen. And just if you have a quick look here, that is actually an image of them. If
now look at Campino's hair, right? Red hair,
one.
right? I said to them, to get into the hardest club in the world, which is East Germany, you have to look really conservative, otherwise they won't let you in. And he turns up at the border looking like this. I'm like, they'll never let you in. So Cuddle was wearing that hat, and I said, put that on and kind of hide your hair as best you can, you know, kind of make it look like you've got no hair. And that's what he did. So he managed to get in. But when we were coming out after this gig, after we came out, he didn't have a hat on. And the East German border guard says, like, who let you in? He said, which idiot let you in? And Campino turns to him and said, one of your idiots. And they hauled him off.
Right, so let's talk about the first gig. So what Mark did, and I think it's quite remarkable, so officially punks didn't exist in the GDR, but the churches, so we are in a situation where at the beginning of the 80s, there are changes happening in the USSR, and they're starting to have an impact on Germany and on East Germany. And the role of the church is something that I want to discuss a little bit later on, but Mark basically gets the punk band over to East Berlin and puts on a gig. And I think the way he puts on this gig is quite remarkable. So I would like you to talk about the first gig of Die Toten Hosen in Berlin in a church.
Yeah, okay, so I was with some other friends in a bar talking about music, and there's this guy sitting at the end of the table just listening to our conversation, this kind of hippie-looking guy, and he says, "You're not from here, are you?" Because he could hear it in my accent, and I said, "No, I'm from England," and he'd never met anyone from England, being in East Germany, you know, so he was fascinated. Nobody was talking about music, and he told me that he had an electric guitar, and I said, "Where do you play?" And he goes, "In the church, at what is called a blues mass," and I thought, maybe my band could play at this blues mass, you know. But no one had synthesizers in East Germany, and no one had drum machines, and it was too difficult. So I thought, okay, the next best thing would be the Toten Hosen, because they'd already smuggled all the music into East Berlin anyway, so everybody knew this band. Even though they were very new at the time, they already knew the music. And so I suggested this to my friends, these two girls. Yeah, I said to them, like, well, you know, maybe we could do a blues mass with the Toten Hosen. So we went to see the priest, and the priest is like, yes, it's a church service and everything. Because the church was like a kind of like a silent protest against the communist regime. And if you were a part of the church, it was seen as a bit from like anti-state, but tolerated to a degree. So here I said, when we come to do the gig, it's not a gig, it's a church service with prayers. You have to pray. And we're like, yeah, we'll do it, everything. Whatever you want us to do, you know, we'll do it, you know. But it wasn't so easy to get all the equipment because the band couldn't go in with all the stuff, you know, because it was like, you know, where are you going with that guitar? Oh, we're going to go and play a secret gig. Right, it wasn't going to happen, right? So we had to borrow the equipment off a band called Planlos, which was a punk band that had kind of acquired equipment over the years from Hungary and Czechoslovakia, but they weren't allowed to play anywhere either. But we managed to use them as the vehicle, kind of like they could go to the church and say, we want to do the gig and we're going to bring our stuff. So we kind of used them as the kind of vehicle, the kind of like the reason for going, and then we kind of just turned up and did the gig. Now, we took only one photograph of us all standing in front of the church, and that's it, and no photographs during the gig. Unfortunately, there were some unofficial members of the Stasi amongst our friends, and we only invited 30 people because we knew we wanted to reduce the risk of people telling on us, really. And we didn't know who in our circle of friends was actually a Stasi operative and kind of informing on us, but we could gather there might be one, you know, but we didn't know who it was. We did the concert. All the time this concert is taking place. We had one amplifier. Everything went in this one amplifier. Vocals, bass, guitar, everything. You try getting an amplifier in East Germany in the 80s, there weren't any shops, you couldn't buy anything like that, you know. And even if you did find one, you couldn't get a cable because there weren't any cables, because they weren't part of the 5-year plan, you know. So you know, the washing machines were more important. So it was really hard to get all the equipment, and we did this gig, and the whole time I'm thinking the Stars are going to kick the door in a minute, and we're all going to get arrested. And I'd said to the girls, you know, this is for you. It's, you know, a risk, because for me, if I get caught, they'll just kick me out of East Germany. But if you get caught, your lives will change forever. You know, you'll end up in prison and be black marked and, you know, everything. You know, I said, do you want to do it? And they went, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. And I think really what they wanted was they wanted that feeling that I always got when I was smuggling cassettes into East Germany. That feeling, that kick of adrenaline, that kick of, like, you know, doing something which was totally super risky, knowing full well that the consequences could be really draconian. You know, you could have a really hard time, but taking that risk, you know. And I only did that because I thought, you know, I'll do it for as long as they'll catch me, you know. One day they might catch me and that'll be game over, but I'll do it for as long as until they catch me. Like being a murderer. Do it till they catch me.
Right, so what happened after the gig then? You said there was an informant there.
Well, yeah, of course, yeah. But I only realised later on, once I got to see my Stasi file, that the informer obviously didn't tell before. Even though they knew before that we were going to be doing this secret gig, they didn't tell before because they wanted to see the gig themselves, right? So I was like, okay. So, yeah. And this gig, we said... This is a photograph from the second concert in the Hoffnungskirche in Pankow, and we said we had this other band called Die Vision, yeah, the Vision. They were our kind of band, cover band, if you like. You know, this was a concert for starving Romanian orphans. That was the reason for doing the gig, and we smuggled our instruments in through a friend who was in the US Army. And we get to the gig. We'd only invited 30 people. We get to the gig, and there's like about 500. So who couldn't keep the trap shut, right? So they couldn't. It's going to be a secret gig, God knows. So all these people came, and the police are sitting outside. And I was thinking, oh, damn, what's going to happen now? And the priest came to me and said, the Totenhausen can't play. It's impossible. The police have said they know what's going to happen, they can't play. And I said to him, well, just tell them that a band from Dresden's going to play in the place. And he's like, what band? What band's that? I said, a band from Dresden. Just say a band from Dresden's going to play. He said, they don't know what the Totenhausen look like. So let's do it for as long as we can. And we played for 3/4 of an hour, and then the police came and went, right, the game's over now. And we thought, oh, God, this is going to turn out to be really bad. And for me, it didn't really have any kind of direct implications, but for my friends, they all got their houses searched, all the flats got searched. And it wasn't like the Stasi kind of went round to their flats secretly. They kind of went round to their flats and made sure that everybody knew that they'd been in their flat and been checking all the stuff, you know, and writing down how many Western periodicals they had, you know, how many records from the West did they have, how many cassettes did they have, where did they get all this stuff from?
I mean, it sounds like it is an entertaining story, but I think it's quite. It could have been very serious. I mean,
it's always very serious. For me, it was always very serious. And smuggling stuff in, I knew what I was getting myself into. I knew that I'd have real problems. I got stopped once in the very early in the 70s, and 79. And I was smuggling some photographs, and I had them stuck to my leg like this, and they strip searched me and found these photographs, and after that I was a marked man. And what I've discovered as well in the meantime, when I saw my Stasi file, that first kid that I met on the train, with the spiky hair and the lilac drain pipes, he was a Stasi informer, and he'd immediately informed on me and said, that British guy's looking for the underground. Now, for the East German authorities, the underground meant political underground. They didn't give any differentiation between, like music or whatever. It was like all political. And therefore I was black marked as this subversive, decadent person.
Okay, so we've discussed the kind of 2 gigs at the church. Why did you go back to the church for the second gig?
Because we knew that there was no other way to go and do this concert. I knew that was the only way we could do the concert. There was no clubs or venues or places that Toten Hosen could play. Definitely not. It wasn't like East Germans didn't have Western bands coming to visit them. Your Boney M and things like that. Exciting TV programs, but something like a punk band from West Germany coming was like impossible. Even like Neubauten wouldn't have got a gig in East Berlin simply for the reason why the way they looked. They didn't want people to see that. They didn't want East Germans to see that there were punks in East Germany, because in the eyes of the authorities, they saw that as punk rock as being the failings of capitalism, and they wanted to promote that. Look at capitalism; it failed and created all this punk rock, as if it's some kind of disease, right? And they didn't want East Germans to see that. So they kind of tried to wash over the fact that there were actually punks in East Germany.
You could have put on an East German punk band, though.
I did. I had Planlos and I had Division. Yeah, it wasn't just all West, it was West and East. It wasn't just one thing, it was 2 things.
And why did you think it was important to also put West German bands on?
Because I knew that they couldn't go to see the Toten Hosen. They couldn't go to the West any time to go and see this band, no matter how much money they had. They could have had thousands, still wouldn't have been able to go and see them. They were confined in basically what was a penal colony called East Germany. East Germany was the like a penal colony, really. It was like there's reason for starting the Second World War. You were going to be punished, and then for you to live in East Germany, and therefore you weren't allowed to go and see the rest of Europe. You weren't allowed to go and see Paris or London, whatever. And these Germans in a deficit and this desire to want to go to see some kind of exotic city, somewhere Rome or someplace like this. In a deficit, they call their kids names like René and Pascal and Giovanni. So you'd meet these East Germans called Giovanni Schmidt. And you'd be like, okay, right. Pascal, whatever.
I had 4 Mandys in my class. That's true. Yeah, that's I can relate to that.
It was the only kind of way you could really connect with something from the West is by giving your kids some kind of westernized name for something.
Right, and you were also there when the wall came down.
Nope, I missed it. I left the night before. I was producing a record in East Germany. I've been invited by the East German authorities to produce a record by this band called Division, who were our support act on this illegal concert. In the meantime, they'd attracted the attention of the authorities, and the authorities said, okay, we can either ban them or we can give them a record contract. And so they gave them a record contract, and the band then selected me as a Westerner to be their producer. And so I went into East Berlin, into the East German equivalent of Hansa Studios, which was the Amiga sound studios near the Berlin Wall border. And you wouldn't have noticed it was a studio, but it just looked like kind of shop front, you know. And I went there every day. And as I'm making this album, East Germany is starting to fall apart. I thought it would only take about 6 weeks to make this LP, and it took like about 3 months, because they only worked in shifts in East Germany because it's a communist country. You know, they can work from 7 o'clock until 3 or whatever. So I had this opportunity to go to East Berlin and make this album, and as it happened, it was the last album of East Germany, because I finished recording the music on the 2nd of November, and I decided to go on this little kind of trip, a road trip to Nicolae Ceausescu's Romania, right, via Czechoslovakia and Poland and Hungary, with some other English friends, Dave Rimmer and Trevor Wilson, who ran this magazine called Ich und mein Staubsauger. And we decided we'd go on this road trip. I told them that Romania was fantastic and they needed to see it. Anyway, so we went on this road trip, and we left in the night before the wall came down. We went, on this day in 1989, we spent it in Auschwitz, right? Because we thought the 9th of November is a very special day in Germany. It's the night of Kristallnacht, yeah, the night of broken glass, when they trashed all the synagogues and stuff and arrested all the people. And we thought probably in Auschwitz they'd probably have some kind of like service to honour the dead or whatever, and honour the victims. And there was nothing. It was as if it was any other day, you know. So we were quite disappointed there wasn't anything. But nobody said to us, "Oh, have you heard the Berlin Wall's come down?" No one said a word. Right, and we travelled all the way through, like Czechoslovakia, Poland, Krakow. You know, went to Czechoslovakia, spent a couple of days there. Get to Hungary, days later, yeah. And I'm so desperate for news, because we knew that things were. We didn't think the wall would come down ever, but we knew there were kind of political things happening in the city at the time. And we get to like. Hungry in the middle of nowhere, and I asked this hotel receptionist, "Do you have any newspapers?" And he gave me this paper, and it said, "East German troops tear down wall." And I'm like, what wall? And then I said, "Have you got any other newspapers?" I thought it was some kind of like Hungarian private eye. I'm like it's very funny, you know. Give us another newspaper, and it says, "Grenztruppe beginnt Teilabriss der Mauer." And I'm like, oh, fucking hell, they've taken away Disneyland. That's it. Game over. Yeah. And so we went to Romania, to Ceausescu's Romania, with this kind of constant thing, what's going on in Berlin.
Right.
So, no, I didn't.
So you decided to stay in Berlin.
Yeah, it was like, wow, finally we've won.
And can you tell us a little bit about the kind of immediate aftermath of the wall coming down? So you have two different cities, well, two different parts of the city. The wall kind of goes halfway through the city. It's known as the death strip, so you have very few old buildings on there, and the buildings that are on there are abandoned. So it's kind of this great space in the middle of the city. It's kind of empty, but then the wall gets torn down. And what happens with this space?
Well, for West Berlin had this one club called the UFO Club, which was a techno club, just playing that kind of music, yeah, house and techno. And initially it was in the cellar of somebody's flat. They saw a hole in the floor and they had it in the flat, but they moved into this kind of location, which was a former supermarket, and made it into a club. And there was a girl on the radio. She had a radio show on Berlin radio, and she would always say, "Tonight happening in this club." And in East Berlin, all these kids would listen to the radio and think this techno scene was this massive, thriving new scene happening in West Berlin. When the wall came down and they all came over, they all wanted to see this like techno club, techno scene. And then they discovered it was only one club. And it was only 100 people, if it was that, 20 people a night, and they were devastated. And they was like, well, what about the parties and stuff, all these ecstasy parties and stuff? It's like, no, it's just in one place. And so they utilised what was the defences of the border, which were along the death strip, these old kind of factories and stuff. They used those, we just took it over. Like, okay, well, let's have a party in here. It's really cool. This former power station on the border, it looked great, the control room to that. And just put a generator in, stroboscope, and sound system, and then you go. There you go. Then you have a party. Loads of drugs.
And how did the authorities respond to all this kind of utilization of that space?
They didn't respond at all. They had other things to deal with, and they completely let everybody. Even the police had come and say it's a bit loud. So fuck off. This is the no man's land. You don't have any jurisdiction. They did really, but they didn't know that. Well, they did. They said, okay, yeah, it's no man's land. It had been drummed into them for 40 years that this piece of earth belonged to nobody. So obviously the police just kind of just left them to their own devices, and so we just did what we did, whatever we wanted, and without restriction, and created the people who had been involved in doing like events in the West. Helped people in the East to do events in the East and show them how to do it. And, this is the way you put on a party. This is what you need. And from it, we had our techno scene, which was very different to what was happening in Manchester at the time.
So you stopped smuggling cassettes because there's a non-existent border, and you're starting to get involved with the electronic music scene in Berlin. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? And maybe we can move on to your record label. And
well, it's all part of it, really. I mean, having tried to make this album for what is now the former Amiga, they decided to call themselves Zong. Very inspired name, really. Right, like from Amiga to Zong. We finished this Division LP, and I was thinking, could maybe like do something else now, right? There's a new sound of music happening in Berlin called techno, and it's really going to be the biggest thing, And they're like, I don't know what that is. Never heard it. They'd never been to a club. They'd never experienced it. They didn't even know what a 12-inch record was. They only knew LPs. And so they said, well, if you know so much about it, why don't you do it yourself? So I thought, okay, I need a name for my record label, and I called my record label Masterminded for Success. It's not called Masterminded for Success Records, and it's not called MFS Records. It's called Masterminded for Success, because making it is all about the periphery as well as much as being a band, or an artist or whatever. It's all about the whole picture, right? And not just about just doing a few records. That was my plan. Anyway, so I called my label Mastermind for Success. The letters MFS were also the abbreviation for the Stasi, right? Ministerium für Staatssicherheit. And I thought it'd be great because all the time on the news and in the papers and stuff, everyone was always talking about MFS this, MFS that. I thought, I'll just utilise that indoctrination. So my record label, when kids say, what's that label? They'll say, it says MFS on it. They can tell their parents, oh, it's from MFS. And their parents will shudder at the thought that the Stasi have got this record label now. Terrorising the kids, And I made these posters and it said, MFS, wir sind zurück, which means we are back. And I posted these. You can't imagine the grief I got for this, right? You can't imagine. Like they were like, "What is that? What is that? What are you doing?" I said, "It's Masterminded for Success." And they knew that they didn't really speak English because they came from East Germany. They all spoke Russian, but they didn't really know anything about English. So I said, it means, created for success. And okay, yeah, MFS. It's a bit unsavoury. But when I managed to pull it through and then, create this idea of like making kind of accessible techno music for people outside of Berlin, really, which I call Trance.
Right. I leave it at that. I've been briefed to not discuss trance.
Really? By who?
Yeah. I think we are.
Look. The idea behind it initially was to take the feeling of euphoria and the Cold War had ended. This threat of nuclear holocaust had suddenly evaporated overnight with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and everyone was suddenly free and happy, and you could talk and do what you wanted. That feeling of excitement and energy and positiveness and like looking towards the future as being something really positive was thrilling, and it was like I wanted to put that feeling in the music. Techno as such, with 1 or 2 or 3 Ks, wherever they wanted to write it in German, it was just kind of like these hard kind of banging beats. But in the UK, people like to have a little melody, and they like to have something they can sort of sing along to or kind of hum along to. And I was thinking, how can I connect those two things? Because in the UK, you didn't have the fall of the Berlin Wall, and you didn't have thousands and thousands of East German kids wanting to listen to one kind of music and take drugs for the first time. Because here we'd already had it and done it years and years before, and so I was seeing here we had rave music, which was like Happy Mondays in Spiral Carpets, Stone Roses, whatever, and it was like that was still guitars, bass, and drums, and I was thinking, here we have a different kind of thing happening. How can I combine the two? How can I mix the two? And I thought it needs to be a bit more kind of hypnotic, trippy, with a bit of melody, and then people will be able to get their heads around it. It was interpreted however it has been interpreted by other artists over the years, and it's become this dirty word called trance. In the meantime, transformed itself into EDM. I don't know. Don't worry, I'm guilty. Honestly, I'm sorry, but that's the way of things are. I didn't dictate to anybody how this is how it's supposed to be. Just the idea was to create, that feeling of euphoria that you have on the dance floor when you're listening to a melody that kind of makes your stomach turn, and all that kind of that ecstasy high that you get, and that kind of emotion which is generated through that drug and the music together and everything. And back then, everybody took the same drug in the club and danced to the same music, and everybody was unified on the dance floor. It didn't matter where you were from, whether you're from East Germany or whether you were from, Hungary or God knows where, Russia or whatever. It didn't matter. It didn't matter how much money you earned. It didn't matter what kind of car you drove. On the dance floor, you were all equal. And especially as everyone was on the same drug, everyone loved each other as well. And that feeling I wanted to put in the music and make it kind of transport itself around the world. That was the idea.
I think I can relate to this. It's I'm from East Germany, so whenever people realize that I'm from East Germany, David Hasselhoff, and
he's in Berlin tonight, actually.
He will be
wearing the same jacket, the lighting jacket, and the scarf with the keyboards on it that's in B Movie. He's there tonight. Yeah, so.
And I think what's so interesting about it is that, love him or hate him a lot, but this sense of euphoria, there's this melody and people would just chant along still,
Well, it's a German song. It's a cover version. It's a German song. It's not looking for freedom in German, is it? It's like I'm looking for the Schwarzwald or something. Yeah, it's a German song. That's why it was already ingrained in people's subconsciousness when he came and did an English version of it. And this guy, I am looking for freedom. He's still looking.
But so there's definitely this sense of that people want to hum along and sing along and have something that really puts them in this very euphoric position that they have experienced because the wall is coming down. You decided to stay in Berlin and not, at least for now, come back to Manchester. Why? What's so special about Berlin?
It's paradise. It's my paradise. It has everything that I want it to have.
Such as?
Clean water, you can drink it out of the tap. No, but not everything. It has everything that I feel that I need from a city. I grew up in this city in the 70s, and experienced all that kind of general strikes every day, doing your homework by candlelight, no heating, no coal, nothing. And I went through all those years, and when I went to Germany, it wasn't any better. Berlin certainly wasn't any better. I went from hot water, running water in Manchester to cold water out of the tap in Berlin. It wasn't about that. It was about what the people of the city made it into what it is. The people that I met and the kind of people that were making the music. In Manchester, people made music in the hope of escape. If you lived in 70s Manchester, you wanted to be in a band because you had no other option than to be in a band because there weren't any jobs. People were getting laid off left, right, and centre. So the drive to be in a band and maybe be discovered and kind of go and live in London or something and make it, was the driving force. Whereas in Berlin, everyone had already escaped Berlin. So there was no real drive to be anything other than just express yourself as a musician and do something which was a bit avant-garde and a bit weird. And I fell into that and was kind of, thrown back by the idea that a band could make noise that sounded like something out of rubbish that they'd just got from a building site half an hour ago. and that was the sort of thing that I fell into. And I was fascinated by it. And I kind of just, became part of that and became involved in that. And I just wanted my fellow compatriots here in the UK to see that. And, I took Malaria, for example, to the UK, and they played in a place called Winchester. Right. The only thing that we all wanted to see the cathedral, but it was such a horrible, grey, grim, rainy night that you couldn't even see the cathedral in Winchester. So, but Malaria played there, and were invited by these students, and it was just the first opportunity to get into the UK. And then we played in London, and then it sort of kind of people started to get interested. And steal our ideas. Like Robert Palmer stole the idea for Addicted to Love for his video from watching Malaria play in the ICA in London,
So in a way, what you did between kind of smuggling music between East Berlin and West Berlin, you started kind of expanding that to do that between countries?
Of course. Before I did the Totenhausen concert in East Berlin, I'd already performed with my band, the Unbekannten, in Hungary. Yeah, in Czechoslovakia. I went to Czechoslovakia and I met these kids, and they were like, got drinking, as you did, and I told them I was in a band, and they said, "Oh, do you want to do a gig?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course, yeah, let's do it." I didn't know how difficult this was going to be. I just went and went to do this concert, and we didn't realise at the time that it was the first time that anyone had ever even done this. Had been so reckless enough to go and do it, and I didn't even know at the time that all the people that attended this gig was actually Czechoslovakia's most wanted dissidents. And if the authorities had known that we were all there, they could have just got us with one like this, yeah, and. Once you'd done it once, it was like, okay, maybe in East Berlin. And I knew East Germany would be so difficult because it was so draconian. It was so much harder than anywhere else. Czechoslovakia was hard on their artists and musicians. My friend David, his father was a classical composer, avant-garde classical composer, and he was a signatory to Charter 77 from Václav Havel, this Charter of Freedom of Speech, right? And he immediately goes banned from performing, banned from writing music, banned from having any kind of activities surrounding music whatsoever. So they were pretty draconian in Czechoslovakia. Hungary, we can do a gig in Hungary. Yeah. I met this guy who was a photographer. I said, maybe we can do a concert with Totenhausen, Unbekannten, in the Young Artist Club in Budapest. Young Artist Club was probably a bit smaller than this room, yeah? So we thought we'd do a gig. The people were so excited about this gig. They had these kind of raffle ticket type tickets that you get, drinks tickets kind of thing. They sold these tickets for this gig, and they sold 2,500 tickets in a club which is half the size of this room. Right? And they're like, what are we going to do? We're going to have to move it to the Karl Marx University. Yeah, in the Kolgash Club in the Karl Marx University, and we have this horror trip from Germany to Hungary, and we get to this place, this university on the Danube, and it's thousands of people standing outside, and the 3 policemen going, "You can't go in. This is an illegal concert. You're not allowed to go in." And I said, "If you tell," I said, there was a girl who was helping us with this gig. I said, "Just tell the policeman that if he doesn't let us play, these 3 policemen are going to have to deal with 2,500 really pissed off people. So what are you going to do?" And she told him, and he just looked at me, and he just went, in Hungarian, "I've told you, I've told you, you're not allowed to play." And then he just walked off and left us to play. Because he realised, like, fucking hell, it's not going to happen. Yeah, we 3 aren't going to stop this lot, So we did our concert. It was great, and we were given loads of money, all this Hungarian beer vouchers. Yeah, this Hungarian money. We had so much money, we didn't know what to do with it. We went back to the Young Artists Club, and we invited everybody who came along with us to free drinks all night, and we still had money the next day. It was like, it was mad. And but that's when I thought, okay, so if we can do those, we can do it in East Germany too, eventually.
I just had it and now it's gone. Hang on. So you're discovering the east of Europe in a way through your gigs, and you're I don't want to say infiltrating those countries with your music, but there's definitely particular power to the performance of music in those countries that these people haven't seen before live on stage, or is it more to do with the kind of music that you play at the time? So you're saying it attracts all the dissidents in one room. And okay, it's not Schlager, which I'm very grateful for, but could it have been another type of music, for example, or a different kind of band that would have had the same impact?
Well, if it had been the Velvet Underground, I think they'd all been really happy, because that's all they talked about all the time, was Nico and the Velvet Underground. They were kind of like obsessed with this kind of anything that was like a bit kind of unconventional. They weren't so interested in the pop music world that was happening in the West. They were more interested in the stuff they could get to hear on John Peel's radio show, really, because they would religiously listen on the medium wave to John Peel's BBC radio show. The further east you got, the more difficult it became to try and get this programme. But they were so well informed. You'd be like, how did you get this information when you don't have any magazines? And there was no internet back then, of course, So, where did they get the information from? And they'd be listening religiously to the radio shows all the time in the West, And John Peel in Berlin, he had 2 radio shows. He had one on the British Forces radio and on the BBC. So they got a double dose each week of John Peel. And I took John Peel over to East Berlin to meet his East German fans, and it's like they couldn't believe it. It was like meeting their god, They see this old bloke with a beard, and they were like, "That's John Peel." Yeah, it's like, and it was only when he opened his mouth and they fell to their knees, they couldn't believe it. They were like, "He really is John Peel." Yeah, and I thought it was really important for John to meet the fans in East Germany, just so he knows what kind of impact that his show actually has on the whole of Eastern Europe, because in the sense that the driving force for all this revolution that happened was the fact that they couldn't buy Pink Floyd's fucking records, That's really what it was. It was like they wanted to buy Frank Zappa records, they wanted to buy Pink Floyd records, Jimi Hendrix, and they wanted to buy all these records that you couldn't get. And that was really the kind of underlying driving force for all of the fact that the whole of Eastern Europe came down. It's like, I want to be able to go to a record shop and buy that record. That's really what it was really all about. All the rest of it's all politics, but in reality it was only about the fucking music, because it's only about the music.
So you're right, it's about the music. My kind of second last question has to do with the power of music. So on the one hand, you're saying it's all about the music, and yet on the other hand, what we see is really a lot of force, a lot of energy behind the music when it's performed. Do you think music can be seen as a non-violent alternative in politics to actually have an impact or achieve something?
It does, yeah, of course it is. Yeah, I mean, it's always been that, really. I think it's always had its force of change that went along with it. The people, you got people who sit in Parliament today who listen to ABBA, right? Maybe in 10 years, you'll have someone sitting in Parliament who listens to Radiohead. You know what I mean? That will definitely cause some kind of change. And music has always been the driving force. I mean, for me, it's always been the driving force. I'm not saying music and politics should be mixed so much, but I think it's just a form of expression that touches people in a different way. People turn off when it's politics. They turn off when if I say, "Oh yes, we want world peace," you kind of turn off. It's like, I don't want to listen to that. But if you put that message in some music which grabs your heartstrings, then it sits straight away. And only music can do that. No politician can.
Right. And my final question is about MFS, the label, not the Stasi, because you kind of started running the label again. And what was your motivation behind that? Why did you start again?
In 2008, I got bored. I got bored with listening to the same old. Today we celebrate 30 years of techno. And it's like 30 years is techno. That's somebody's life, that is. Yeah. And it's like, when I was a kid, trends were always like 3, 4, 5, maximum 5 years. And then it moved on to become something else, and new fashion appeared and new ideas appeared and stuff. But 30 years of techno, after a while, I started to get a bit kind of bored. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to make the music myself, go back into the studio and start making music myself. And so I started to do that. And and thought, if I ever find anything that will ever kind of grab my attention or make me see something in it, then I might reinvigorate my label. But until I see that, I'll just leave it as it is. And all these unappreciative artists who were on my record label who didn't understand what I was doing for them, you know, they can all go to fuck, you know, because I was like it's a 24-hour-a-day job being a record label owner and doing everything for your artist, you know. And I was thinking, okay, so I was doing a B-movie tour of China, a 2-month tour, illegal tour of China. It wasn't officially sanctioned.
There's a theme here, isn't there?
It wasn't like it being shown in cinemas or anything. You know, it was like being shown in clubs and places where bands played and stuff. And we did this tour, and I was in this place called Chengdu, which is in Sichuan province on the southwestern part of China, very the periphery of China, if you like. You know, it's like Manchester, and I saw that it was at a festival, and I was DJing at this festival, showing my film, and there was this band on, and they were called Stolen, and they just completely blew my mind. I was like, wow, this is really something else. It's like they're mixing all these things that were kind of familiar, but they kind of played it back in a fresh way, you know, and they're Chinese. And I was thinking, I wonder what you're going to do with your music, you know, where you're going to go with it. And they were like, well, maybe we could go and do a demo together. So we made a demo together. And then they came to Berlin and we made an album together. And then I went on a little kind of trip with Bernard Sumner to Poland, so to Gdansk. And while we were on this trip, I just indoctrinated him with this record. All the time, you know. Listen to this, it's Chinese. He found it quite interesting. He was like, Chinese, what are you doing? Because he said to me, what are you doing? I said, I'm producing a band from China. And he's like, China? What does that sound like? Yeah, I'm sure he had some kind of other image of what it was like, you know. And I played him this track. He's like, let's play it again, do it again. And then they invited him on to play, to be their support act on the European tour, just recently, you know. But in the meantime, I was like, what are you going to do with this record? We've made this album, you're going to release it in China, and what about the rest of the world? And I thought I might as well just reinvigorate my record label and present this Chinese band to the rest of the world. You know, so you know everything you know about China is about, you know, your telephone or your clothes, your shoes, everything's made in bloody China, right? But you don't know much about Chinese music. You don't know what it sounds like. You don't know what modern, right now, today, Chinese music sounds like. And Stolen just replicated that at that moment. And I was like, well let's just give China a musical face and let's show people what young Chinese kids really are about. You know, we all know this kind of political side, and yeah, you know, let's take it or leave it. It's like that's how it is. These kids are just like you and I, and they want to live a life like you and I. And let's give them the opportunity to show themselves musically and show what they can do. And they were really kind of impressive, you know. And I think anyone who saw Stolen on this tour, you know, they were kind of at first maybe skeptical, you know, what they're going to be like. But at the end, they understood everything, what was going on stage, and it was very endearing. I think that, you know, that we brought our cultures together with music, which was politically impossible.
So you're continuing to provide platforms for music to be played and for people to come together on the dance floor?
Yeah, and I choose the hardest, of course, China.
Right.
Nothing's easy in life.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today, and thank you so much for Mark Reeder
to
be in conversation. 5 minutes.
Have you got any questions? We've got time for 1 or 2 questions.
Right.
We've got 5 minutes. So have anyone got any questions? Someone at the back there, you have to shout.
Can we find B-movie somewhere?
It's online in Germany only. You can get it on some, you know, YouTube or whatever. So ask someone else. I can't tell you where you can find it, can I? Not really, you know. I'll smuggle it in for you if you. Yeah, I'll try my best. Okay. Is that it then?
Yeah, I think everybody's quite shy.
They're all too shy.
Yeah. Okay.
I can't see you around. We can't see anything. We're blind. It's all lights.
How did you find your day-to-day living in Berlin, knowing that everything you were doing was really dodgy?
Okay, hang on. Before Mark answers, just for those of you who haven't heard, the question was, how did you find your day-to-day living, knowing that it was quite dodgy?
I never thought of it like that. You don't think, oh, I'm going to do something really dodgy today. Hey, you know, I didn't. No way. I just did it, you know. And it's only later you think, fucking hell, why did I do that? Could have got arrested. I mean, there's a photograph here of like Erich Honecker on a May Day parade, and that photograph, I just decided I'd walk in the parade, May Day parade, and I walk in there and I get my camera and I point at Erich Honecker and I just press the shutter. And the Stasi arrested me because you weren't allowed to just be in the parade. Everyone who was in the parade was actually in the party, and I wasn't. They didn't let me join.
Absolutely. I was amazed when you sent that picture, and I thought, how did you manage to get that? You were properly fleeced before, and then you weren't allowed to take pictures either.
There I was, like...
Okay, right. So, are there any more questions? Okay, I can see one there.
We watched a movie last night on a famous American streaming service on YouTube. But I mean, it was amazing. It's absolutely brilliant. But the footage, like, did you know that you were documenting your life and what you were doing? Were you thinking about posterity, or did you just love filming?
No, I thought if I film it, I won't forget it. Because I couldn't remember what I was doing half the time. Very biscuitized, you see. And it was like, you know, I was like, oh, I need to film that just in case, you know. I forget.
An actor who looked like you as well.
Well, in some of this, we've got like about 1.5% of the film is a guy who was my double for these scenes. You can't see his face most of the time, but he is wearing my old clothes. That's why it's really difficult to discern whether it's part real or not. But most of the time, it's me. Yeah.
Okay, there's a question here at the front.
I would love to know, Mark, what you do to us you were smuggling.
So the question here at the front is, this lady would like to know what kind of photographs Mark was smuggling down his legs.
I can't tell you that. I'm speechless. This is the first time. Can't tell you that. Private, you know.
Okay, let's move on quickly. There's a question over here.
You should have seen the border guards when this song. There was one particular border guard at Checkpoint Charlie who was a real bastard, and he hated me guts. He knew I'm doing something dodgy, right? So he's like, right, and he just said, "You come with me. Empty your pockets." And I emptied my pockets, and I got this skeleton key for my flat, and he went, "You're going to be breaking into flats in East Germany." I'm like, what would I want to steal? The 1950s television, right? It's like no, it's my door key. It's like, no, empty your pockets, take your trousers off. What's that? And I just thought, oh dear, you know, the more pieces of clothing I took off, another kind of officer came into this room, and it was a bunch of all these blokes with all gold on the shoulders and stuff. And I take my trousers off, and they just all went just like, what is this? Photographs, you know. Yeah, well, they let me in. After that, I was considered very subversive, decadent, and it's interesting, subversive and decadent, and they were curious at my activities of what my agenda was, because they assumed that I had some kind of agenda, right? Whatever that might have been, you know. And if you've ever seen Burn After Reading, it's probably a bit like that. They made it up. Yeah, of course, yeah. I'm not allowed to see all my Stasi file, actually. I'm only allowed to see a fifth of my Stasi file, because the rest of my Stasi file is unfortunately with the federal German Bundesnachrichtendienst, which is like the German FBI, basically, or CIA or whatever. Yeah, they've got the rest of my file, and I'm not allowed to see that, even though I've applied quite a few times now to get it, to see it, but I'm not allowed to see it. I'm only allowed to see a bit.
They all thought, both sides thought you were probably informing the other side?
The West, they tapped my phone. You know, they were on to me as much as the Easties were, because I was going always over to the East. So it's like, what is this guy doing? I went with TV programmes, you know, the BBC and ITV. I took them to East Berlin. I took John Peel to East Berlin. All these people coming back, you know, and I think they were quite curious as as to my activities.
How did you get the cassettes in?
Oh, wouldn't you like to know?
Yeah, might help me get my tape recorder in the gigs.
Tape recorders are a bit difficult. The cassettes are dead easy.
Down Trance.
Nah. I've had my trousers taken off before.
Right, I think there's time for one more question. I think it's the one here at the front.
You took the tube into East Berlin, didn't you? And I remember that, and I recorded it, and I can't find it. Have you ever found a recording of it? And what was it like taking the tube into...
What was it like? The whole programme initially started off with Chris Bond, who was a writer for the NME, telling Muriel Gray that he had a mate in Berlin who would do this programme for her and get it all sorted out. And I said to Chris, why are you not doing it? And he said, I'm going to China. And so he disappeared and left me in the lurch with this programme. So I started, they wanted to show West Berlin, and I'm like, well, what about East Berlin as well? You know, Berlin is a complete city, it's just divided. The possibilities of actually doing something in East Berlin was quite remote, but I thought, well, let's have a go, you know. So I went over and met this guy called Herr Kuhl. Yeah, he was wearing this brown suit, right, Herr Kuhl, and it was always. I said I want to have the Tube wanted to have an East German punk band, but I knew that would be impossible. They could never do it, you know. And I'm saying we need a young band. We don't need to have like the old guard of Pudis and Silly and Karat. We want to show it's a young youth program. We want to see a young band. They had nothing to offer, you know. They kept trying to give me these old geriatric rockers, you know. And I was on the tram and I see these two guys walking down the street, and I jumped off the tram and I stopped them and said, do you want to be on British television? And they looked at me like, what is this guy? I look like an undertaker, actually. I had this black suit on and black coat on and that. And they looked at me like, thought, this man's a lunatic. And what's he talking about British television? In East Germany, to do anything, you needed a license. You needed a license to own a guitar. You needed a license to perform in front of an audience and all this kind of stuff. And they didn't have any of that. They were just practicing in some schoolyard. And I said, let me see what kind of music you do. And they said, we like the Police. And I thought, oh, God, all right. It's the nearest thing I'm ever going to get to punks in East Germany, on the telly. I thought, let me go and have a look, you know. And they were really good. And I thought, OK. I went to Herr Kuhl and I said, I've heard of this band called Jessica. And he said, where did you hear it? I said, from the Free German Youth. OK, we will check. So off he went, and I ran out of this building, and I ran to the band, and I said, you've got to phone the guys at the Free German Youth now and tell them that British television wants to put you on television, and you've heard this rumour, and they have to verify it and vouch for you. And because one of the guys, he knew this guy at the Free German Youth, in the end, when Mr. Cool made this phone call, the FJ Yacht guy says, yes, we know this band, they're young, you know. And so I got to get this, you know, with this cat and mouse game with Herr Kuhl and the band, you know, like he's telling me one thing, I'm running to the band to tell them to do the opposite, you know. And in the end, we got them on the telly, you know. In the end, and it was like, and East Germany, when they realised, oh, the Tube are going to break this new East German band on British television before DDR2 TV does it. So what did they do? They organised immediately for the band to be on East German television, just so they could say, we did it first. So there you go.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much again for coming and for listening to Mark Reeder. If you have any more burning questions, I'm sure Mark will have a cup of tea or some other beverage in the bar for a bit.
I'm not having any more like coffee here. It's bloody awful.
And also, I know that quite a few of you will be off to HOMOBLOC tonight, but you can see Mark again tonight at Louder Than Words. So if there's anything that you really want to engage him with, then go and pop over there. So thanks very much again and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.